and welcome to the Bright Agent. Today I am going to be talking about vaulting ambition in Macbeth. Now, some people may be using this vaulting ambition as a misconception by saying that ambition is the only thing which drives Macbeth and underestimate how much they can use this quote. I've come to you in this form of a live video today in order to show you how important, how fundamental this quote is. Ensure you like and subscribe for more helpful videos that will enrich your learning and help you achieve the highest grades you can get possible. Now, here is a full quote because people often only remember vaulting ambition and overleaps itself. The actual quote goes like this: I have no spur to prick the size of my intent, but vaulting ambition, which overleaps itself and falls on the other. Now, vaulting ambition could be a technique used by Shakespeare in the form of a dynamic verb for vaulting to describe how high and reckless of a jump Macbeth is taking. And Macbeth realizes how high his goal is to achieve kingship and eventually take power. But the way he perceives it is through taking a dangerous, immoral action, which is killing the king, which is his intent. Now Shakespeare uses this to present ambition as an unnatural jump, rather than just a gradual climb to authority. Now you could use this quote as a contrast with why chance will have me king or chance will crown me. Because in this case, chance crowning Macbeth demonstrates that Macbeth is willing to remain passive, to remain patient, so that way he is ready for the authority when the time comes. And this establishes his moral authority and his moral intelligence. However, when you look at Macbeth's lack of morals later on in this quote for vaulting ambition, it demonstrates that he has lost his sense of morals. And Shakespeare could also be using this to describe Macbeth's ambition as something which transforms him into from a passive observer into a violent wrongdoer who partakes in violence. Hence why he transforms from a noble cousin and brave Macbeth into a dead butcher, which is how Shakespeare changes the audience perception of how ambition is portrayed. Now, my next part of analysis is going to be based on overleaps itself. Now, at first, you may not see what much to do with this section of the quote, but you could use the fact that Shakespeare uses the verb overleaps itself to demonstrate the fact that overleaps suggests that Macbeth is taking a jump. He's taking a jump up, and then he crashes down. And then you could look further, you can zoom in further, and realize that the reflexive part of the verb itself presents Macbeth's ambition as self-destructive and carrying a lot of momentum that propels Macbeth to partake with Lady Macbeth to usurp the king. So you could use this part of it to suggest how dynamic Macbeth is becoming, and him having a sword that smokes with bloody execution actually becomes ironic in this part, in Act 1, Scene 7, because he uses his bloodthirsty nature, being Bellona's bridegroom, to later become a bloodthirsty person who ends up becoming a tyrant. Now, you could also analyze another part of the quote, which is him falling on the other. Now, him falling on the other is an extended metaphor of horse imagery. So Macbeth uses this idea of horse imagery to suggest that he is the rider. And him being the rider, he initially takes a massive jump into trying to become king, and it could reflect the idea that Macbeth eventually sees the positive benefits of rising to power. He sees the power and the influence, and he thinks he'll be satisfied with it prior to gaining influence. However, later on you could describe the horse as a sort of foreshadowing for him falling down, crashing down, losing influence due to his growing paranoia and realization that his power through usurpation does not allow him to benefit the way Duncan does. You can also use this part of the quote to contrast the fact that Duncan has virtues that please like angels. So you could use that to describe Duncan's lack of conflict or violence in his nature, suggests that he is a better ruler because he does not cause the conflicts or the metaphorical disease or the metaphorical suffering that is presented in this part of the extracts. You can link that back to kinship to show how this fall is caused by Macbeth's ambition. And finally, the spur. The spur is used as structural symbolism. Now, Macbeth has no spur to prick the sides of his intent, but vaulting ambition. Analyze that he has no spur to prick his intent. That's a part majority of people leave out. That's what will get you to level 5, upper level 5, and way into level 6. The fact that you can analyze the fact that he has no spur to prick the insides of his intent, but vaulting ambition. The spur is you. Him saying he has no spur demonstrates that he admits that he has no judgment or reason to eventually murder the king, which is his intent, as I mentioned earlier in this video. But his vaulting ambition, suggesting that's actually an act of internal corruption rather than an external necessity. Just realize that he didn't need to kill the king for power. You can link this to fate and free will, because you could argue that he had no control since he jumped and then he fell. But then on the other side of the argument, you could argue that these spurs allow him to control his metaphorical horse, his jump and fall to power, which is how he ends up experiencing a temporary uplifting before a downfall. It also suggests an uplifting in his mental state, albeit temporary, before him remembering the guilt. He says Macbeth has murdered sleep, which suggests that he is starting to manifest the guilt and realized the suffering he has not only caused the natural order, but also to himself. So you could argue that he fully controls this because it foreshadows his downfall and therefore causes him to end up showing the example of unchecked ambition manifesting the person. Shakespeare also uses this to demonstrate that ambition can be beneficial in empowering a person into achieving the goals that they desire. But this form of unchecked, unrefined ambition demonstrates the fact that if it remains unchecked, if it is left to impurify people in the Jacobean era, then it will end up having a knock-on effect on the people around them, on the society around them, and also themselves. Because that can cause them to become more immoral and not be able to understand that they have fallen just like that. Now we move on to context. Macbeth's ambition is an example of his hamasha, his fatal flaw. Now, Macbeth's ambition is a fatal flaw because this actually acts as the turning point. He realizes this ambition can aid him into becoming king, but he overlooks the fall that occurs. And therefore, that's how he ends up having a downfall, just going down, disappearing, just like that. So this is his downfall because he uses this ambition thinking that it's beneficial, although he uses this for foreshadowing. He foreshadows his own downfall. He foreshadows his own disaster to the country. And this, therefore, his ambition makes him kill the king, which destroys God's natural order, an ideology that King James I presented. And this, the natural order that God presented, because it was usually like villains with Villeins, with peasants, then it went up to the knights and nobles, then it went up to some of the other rulers or earls and barons and thanes, whatever. Then it went up to the king, and then it went up to God, because the king was perceived to be the second in command. This means that killing the king then became a massive disruption of the natural chain of being, because that's what made the horses eat each other in Act 3, demonstrating that the murder of this good King Duncan, his faculties born so meek, leads to absolute chaos and catastrophe, because this order has not been restored. That may be used by Shakespeare to demonstrate the consequences of his ambition. It overreaches, it overleaps itself. It's an uncontrollable force that ends up propelling Macbeth up, down to his downfall. This leap and fall could also be a representation of the country, Scotland. Now the country is initially like this because it is at peace, it is at resolution with itself. Then it goes up because the tension rises. It then gets a new gash every day, because that's what Macduff describes it to Malcolm. And he even laments Scotland by saying, "Oh Scotland, Scotland," which demonstrates a dire situation that Scotland is in because of this ambition. Then it falls down because natural order has been restored. They've been appointed with a new noble king, Malcolm. After Duncan has been murdered, Macbeth takes over, gets overthrown by the English opposing side, and then Malcolm restores the balance. Takes Scotland out of the devilish hands of death into God's protection of life. That's what you could use. That's the context you could use for this. Another important level 6 piece of context. Stay tuned. Another level 6 piece of context is the fact that King James wrote Basilica Doron, which means royal gift from Greek. Now, King James I argues from this that your outward expression should match your inward behavior, or something like that. But the point that he's trying to present is that kings should always have beneficial behavior. They should always be a good father to the people, as he mentions, rather than end up failing the people. So, if you look at it from that perspective, Basilica Doron may be referenced by Shakespeare as a dramatization of the warnings from Basilica Doron, by using Macbeth as a construct from that to present the dangers of not trying to live up to the good standards of being a king, trying to be subservient to the people rather than ruling through tyranny and oppression and bloodshed. In essence, Shakespeare is trying to present to not only his contemporary audience, but also to modern audiences to this day, that a good king or ruler or a leader should have beneficial qualities that serve a country rather than protect oneself, in order to have a more beneficial, secure society. Now, that is all I have for today, and thank you to the comments which said that my video was excellent and amazing. Thank you, everyone. Now, I have come to an end here for Macbeth, but to those 7 people still remaining, ensure you like and subscribe and comment on my video. It would really help motivate me to continue making more videos like these that will help multiple people achieve the highest grade possible. Thank you for listening. Be bright, stay right, and I hope you have a good day.